Here's some last minute ACT tips for the days before the test. It should help you improve your score. Tell a student about this video so that they can watch it and get some last minute tips to improve their score on the ACT test that many people are taking this Saturday. Number one, make sure you're familiar with the timing and that when you practice under real conditions as much as possible. That means try to practice full tests in one sitting and time them accurately. Don't give yourself any extra time. You don't want to go to test day and be used to working math, for example, in 72 minutes instead of 60 minutes. So here are the timing for the sections. And maybe you don't have time now to do a full practice test. It takes about 3 hours. But maybe you have time to do one passage from each section. And here's the normal times. English is 45 minutes, 9 minutes per passage. Math is 60 minutes, 1 minute per passage. Reading 35 minutes, 8 minutes 45 seconds per passage. And science is 35 minutes, 4 minutes if there's 5 questions, 5 minutes if there's 6 questions, 6 minutes if there's 7 questions. If you have accommodations and you've got time and a half, well, time and a half is really a little bit of extra time. So this is what time and a half looks like. Time and a half is 70 minutes for English, 14 minutes per passage, 90 minutes per math, 2 minutes per question. You can try to complete questions 1 to 10 and 11 to 20 in 15 minutes each. Leave yourself some extra time for the harder questions. Reading is 55 minutes. You get 13 minutes 45 seconds per passage. And science is 55 minutes. 6.5 minutes for 5 questions, 8 minutes for 6 questions, 10.5 minutes for 7 questions. That's the timing. That's what you need to practice with. So if you have double time, just double the original times. And you won't be taking the test on Saturday if you have double time. But make sure that you're used to those times. You really don't have time to practice it now. If you have a very simple watch that doesn't have an alarm, bring that with you. Do not bring in a watch that has an alarm, even if you don't set it, because that alarm could go off and you'll be kicked right out of there if your alarm goes off when you start making noise, more than likely. All right, here's some English tips. And I would say make sure you are familiar with some of the basic rules that the English section covers. I have a cheat sheet including what I call the Big Five grammar rules that are tested on ACT English. It is sentences and fragments and punctuation between them, subject-verb agreement, noun-pronoun agreement and case, commas, and parallel structure. And you will find an ACT English cheat sheet linked in the description. So you can download that and read that a few times in each remaining day and read it the morning before the test so that you're ready to take it. When in doubt, shorter is better. And that there's a couple of times where that comes true on the English test. Let me find an example of that. Shorter is better. Let me find this one. Here's a good question for shorter is better. Shorter is better. Notice question number 7. It says, as they shifted away from European clock themes, sharp cathedral-like points and spires gave way to round-topped trees and curvy leaves. Their later clocks reflect the Biley's keen interest in U.S. history. Well, reflect is a very short way to say it. If you're in a hurry or you're very confident, you say, shorter is better. Look at the other choices. They're so long. I'm just picking 7A, reflect. Looks pretty good to me. Look at B, make clear and evident. Well, if it's clear, it is evident. So B has redundancy. Why would you repeat clear and evident? It's out. C, show an indication of the existence of. Well, if I show an indication of something, I'm showing that it exists. So that kind of repeats the same idea. D, are proof to indicate evidence of. Well, proof and evidence are the same thing. I've repeated it. So my first thought here, reflect, Shorter is better. When in doubt, pick the shorter one. That can also hold true for transition questions. And I have one already picked out here. Let's see. I will find it here. These are all from actual ACT tests, by the way. So here's an example of a transition question. Now, normally with transition questions, you want to cross out the word that is already the transition and look at the sentences and see how they relate to each other and come up with your own idea of what the transition is between them. Is it cause and effect? Is it opposite direction, like contradicting? Is it same direction? Some form of same direction, like an example or another thing or something that's similar. However, there's something to keep in mind. When you have these transition questions, if there is an option that doesn't have the transition in it, or if there is an option to delete the transition, it is right over 85% of the time. In fact, the delete the transition is right over 90% of the time. So check it first and see if it works. If it works, pick it. So look at number 32, has delete the underlined portion. I'm going to check it because it has the option to delete. It says they could be, in the early 17th century, lobsters were plentiful in the New World. I think among is wrong there. They could be gathered by hand in shallow waters or caught by dozens in nets tossed over the sides of boats. After heavy storms, shorelines were often littered with lobsters, sometimes in piles 2 feet high. Well, that seems fine to me. I'm going to delete it and pick answer J, which, by the way, is correct here. So you might want to check it too and see if any of those transitions work. But if delete works or the option without the transition works, pick it because it's right more than 85% of the time. It's not right 100% of the time. That's why I say check it first. Don't just blindly pick it. If you're near the end of the test and you get one of these transition questions and you have to guess and there's an option to delete or doesn't have the transition, pick that one. You're guessing. It's the best bet if you're just going to guess it. There's a certain type of question, I call them a form of add, replace, delete questions, but they're questions that have to do with which of the following would accomplish some kind of a goal. Like it might say, which of the following gives the best clear illustration, or which of the following lists the steps that this person takes. Just answer the question. Go look at the answer choice and then see which one does what the question is asking about. And I've got an example of that. Let me find it here. There's an example of that. So the question says, number 7 again, given that all the choices are accurate, which one most clearly indicates, I want a clear indication of why the actions described in this sentence were taken. Well, what actions are described in the sentence? It says, soon after the start of the project, its managers had to upgrade hardware to handle the contributions. I want a clear indication of why this is done. Proved it to be a real challenge? That doesn't tell me clearly why upgraded the contributions or upgraded the hardware. Just because it proved to be a challenge, that's very general, proving to be a challenge. We're reaching 70,000 classifications per hour. Whoa, that's a lot of classifications per hour. I better upgrade the hardware. I better have better hardware. I guess they're talking about computers to handle this. So I better do it. That's the only one that really has any detail in it is B. Excuse me. C. Turned out to be very helpful. That's not very clear. That's general again. Turned out to be helpful. Helpful how? If I'm cooking, it could be helpful to turn on the stove. It could be helpful to get a pan. If I'm trying to do something with my contributions, it might be helpful to hire more people. It might be helpful to get a bigger building. It might be helpful to have windows. It might be helpful. All kinds of things might be helpful. And then they did successfully, which they did successfully. They upgraded the hardware successfully. Well, that doesn't indicate why they upgraded the hardware. The fact that they did it successfully doesn't indicate why. The fact that it turned out to be helpful doesn't indicate why. And the fact that it proved to be a real challenge doesn't indicate why. So B is the only one that answers the question. Math section. We're just doing some quick tips for this ACT test. Math section. Know every item on the ACT Math cheat sheet linked in the description below. So download it, read it a few times each day remaining, and then read it the day of the test too. You won't have time to read it after the English section. Read the English cheat sheet and then read the math cheat sheet. Make sure you're familiar with those items on there. And if you have to take the test again before you know what your score is from this Saturday, go through that cheat sheet, every single item on it, and make sure you understand every single item that's on that cheat sheet. If you'd like to have additional help, send me an email, franktutor@outlook.com. I can do tutoring sessions, or I'll just answer questions that you email. Ask me 1,000 questions. Ask me to put a study plan together for you. I'll do that too. I'll do that without you even having to be tutored by me. All right, so one of the things that the math section tests and that some students struggle with, or they forget, or maybe never had, is matrices. And here's some simple information about matrices that'll get you ready to handle those questions. If you're adding or subtracting matrices, all you have to do is add or subtract the numbers in the same positions. So 3 plus 2 is 5. 0 plus 1, 1. 4 plus 7, 11. Negative 1 plus 4, 3. That's how you add those matrices. Sometimes you might have to multiply a matrix by a number. Well, multiply each number in the matrix by that number. 3 times 3, 9. 3 times 0, 0. 3 times 4, 12. 3 times negative 1, negative 3. So that would be the result of that matrix multiplication. If you have to multiply two matrices together, there's two things to remember. Thing number one, matrices are categorized or named in number of rows by number of columns. So, and the order matters when I'm multiplying. So if I have a 3 by 4 matrix, a 3 row by 4 column matrix, and I want to multiply that by a 2 row by 4 column matrix, can't do it because I just write them one after the other and these middle numbers don't match. The columns of the first matrix must match the number of rows of the second matrix. In this case, it doesn't. So let me try a 3 by 4 multiplied by a 4 by 2. Well, look at this. The middle numbers match, so I can multiply those. The outer numbers reveal what the new matrix will look like, what the result will look like. It will be a 3 row by 2 column result. And again, order matters. If I want to multiply a 4 by 2 matrix and multiply that by a 3 by 4 matrix, cannot do it because the middle numbers don't match. Let me give you an example of multiplication, then give you an example from the test. I'm going to multiply this matrix, 2, 3, 4, 1, times this matrix. 1, this is a 2 by 2. This is going to be a 2 by 3. 1, 0, 4, 3, minus 1, 2. Whatever. I'm just making these things up as I go. I have to put that down there. I've got a dead spot on my screen. So the middle numbers match, and the result is going to be a 2 by 3 matrix. 2 rows and 3 columns. I'm just going to put little lines there to remind myself. It's 2 rows by 3 columns. And when you multiply matrices, go across the first row, the row of the first one, down the columns of the second one, and then put the results across the rows of the result and add them together. So watch this. 2 times 1 is 2 plus 4 times 3 is 12. 2 plus 12, 14. Then I'm going to do 2 times 0. Notice I'm going across times down. 2 times 0 plus 3 times negative 1. 2 times 0 is 0. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. That's negative 3. Then I'm going to do the next one. 2 times 4 is 8. 3 times 2 is 6. 8 plus 6, 14. So I go across by down, and then I keep going across until I exhaust all the columns. Then I go to the second row. 4 times 1 is 4, plus 1 times 3 is 3. 4 plus 3 is 7. 4 times 0 is 0, plus 1 times minus 1 is minus 1. 4 plus minus 1 is 3. 4 times 4 is 16, Plus 1 times 2 is 2. That's 18. That would be the result of that matrix multiplication. Now, I have an example from an actual ACT test. Let me go find it. An example of matrix multiplication. And let me see if I can find it here. Let's see. Matrix multiplication. Where are you? Here it is. It says matrix A has dimensions of 3 by 2. And I want to multiply that by a matrix with a dimension of 2 by 3. Well, notice the middle numbers match, so I can do it. And then, and there's no answer choice that says I can't. And then the result is the outer numbers, a 3 by 3 matrix. Well, this has 1 row and 1 column. This is a 1 by 1, so F is out. This is a 2 rows, 2 columns. G is out. This is a 2 rows, 3 columns. H is out. This is a 3 rows, but only 2 columns. J is out. This is a 3 rows, 3 columns. I don't even have to do any multiplication there to know that K is the answer. And look at the number on this. This is a number 48. This is getting near the end of the test. Math gets harder when you go from early to late. The numbers closer to 60 get harder and harder. And this one is just hard because it's a concept that people tend to forget. 51 through 60 tend to really be concepts people tend to forget. So learn matrices and you'll be able to handle maybe some of the harder questions on the ACT that you happen to take that day. Here's a, sometimes they ask you about the discriminant of a matrix, usually just a 2 by 2. And here's a formula for the discriminant of a 2 by 2. If I have a matrix that looks like this, A, B, C, D, and I want the discriminant equals A times D minus C times B. So cross like that, minus across like that. So here's an example, general example, and then I'll give you an example of a question. What if I have a matrix that's 3, 4, 2, 6? The discriminant would be 3 times 6 is 18, minus 2 times 4, 8, which is equal to 10. The discriminant of that matrix would be 10. Here's an example from the ACT test. Let me find it right here. I said discriminant, I meant determinant. The determinant of a matrix ABCD equals AD minus CB. AD minus CB. What must be the value of x for the matrix x8, xx to have a determinant of minus 16? Well, it's x times x, which is x squared, minus 8 times x equals minus 16. Now you have to know something about quadratics. When I have a variable squared and just the variable, I want to get everything to one side. So x squared minus 8x, add 16 to both sides, plus 16 equals 0. I want numbers that multiply to 16 and add to negative 8. It's not 2 and 8. Negative 2 times negative 8 is negative 16, but negative 2 plus negative 8 is negative 10, so those don't work. 16 and 1, they have to both be negative because 2 negatives multiplied together is a positive, and I need a negative answer. Negative 16 plus negative 1 is not negative 8. How about negative 4 and negative 4? Negative 4 times negative 4 is equal to positive 16, and negative 4 plus negative 4 is negative 8. X minus 4 times x minus 4 equals 0. And then I set each one of these equal to 0. Add 4 to both sides, I get x equal 4 and x equal 4. Or, you know, a shortcut, it's just going to, side's going to become opposite. So it's 4 and 4. The answer to this one is E, 4. Pretty easy now that you know about matrices. So just clear up something that tends to give people a little bit trouble on the ACT, and we can clear it up by learning about matrices. Next section, I'll give some tips on this section, the reading section. The fundamental rule of ACT reading is the answer is on the page. It has to be on the page, otherwise we cannot agree to an answer on a multiple choice test. Here's how I recommend to work the test. First, read the passage. Some people like to skim it. Some people like to read the whole thing. Some people like to read the whole thing and take notes. Some people like to read only the first couple of sentences of every paragraph. Close to the ACT, it is not wise to change your style of working or reading the section. So read it however you're going to read it, and then go to the questions. Read and understand the question, cover the answer choices. Do not look at the answer choices until you perform the following steps. There's an exception to that when there are opposite questions that say, which one of the following did not happen in the passage? Or everyone except the following had a job. Or Bob gives the following reasons except for which one, that he couldn't go to work that day. So when it's opposite, you're not going to be able to find something in the passage that didn't happen. So you need to look at the answer choices and see if each one is in the passage. And then if it's a timing thing, which of the following happened chronological order, that means by time, or which one of them happened first in the passage, just by placement. You can't know what you're looking for without looking at the answer choices. So those are two exceptions, but most of the time, don't look at the answer choices. First, find the information to answer the question, and then come up with the answer in your own mind. That's anticipating it in your own words. And then reveal the answer choices, or look at them and eliminate those that don't match your answer and pick the one that matches your answer. Maybe sometimes you can't get down to one answer choice, so the best you can do is eliminate a few and guess amongst the rest. Well, that's better than nothing. So on the reading section, one other thing you can do on the reading section is that you can read some people will say, well, why don't I read all the questions so I know everything I'm looking for? Every reading passage has 10 questions. Nobody, unless you have a photographic memory, you are not going to remember 10 questions as you're reading the passage so that you can answer all 10 questions. If you have a photographic memory, read the questions first, and then as you're reading the passage, you'll be answering the questions. If you don't have the photographic memory, read one question first, and then look for that answer as you're reading the passage. Well, there's different types of questions on the test, so which type of question should you read first? Well, I say look for a question that doesn't have a line reference and isn't a big picture question, some kind of fact question. Here's a passage, and here's a question. It says it can be reasonably inferred from passage A that the organized industrial process of filmmaking differed from the artisanal model, and that artisanal filmmaking was accomplished through the work of what? Well, there's no line reference there. It's not a big picture question. It's asking about a detail. So I'll see if I can find that detail as I'm reading the passage for the first time. And I'm looking for, how does artisanal filmmaking, which is accomplished through what? What is artisanal filmmaking like compared to the process of organized industrial? Ellis Gray, later Guy Blatch, has fascinated film critics, Ellis Guy, I guess, and historians since the publication of her memoir in 1976, 8 years after her death and more than 50 years after her last activities as a professional filmmaker. Guy is a compelling figure for several relatively distinct reasons. There are very few obvious, clear firsts in film history, but Guy was definitely, unquestionably, the first woman filmmaker. Hold on, I'm going to zoom in on this because all of a sudden I'm worried that maybe people watching the video can't see it. But Guy was definitely, unquestionably, the first woman filmmaker in the history of cinema. Guy had wanted, with her memoir, to reestablish her position in film history, and this is exactly what happened in the archives after 1976. For it turns out that many of her films were there all the time, but had not been identified as hers. This one is the fate of most early filmmakers. Film prints had a distressing tendency to lose beginnings and endings with repeated showing, and directors were almost never identified in the initial titles that did survive. Now, I'm still looking for what the artisanal process was like, and I have to describe that, and then how it differed from the industrial process. One way when you're actually answering the question is you would skim for that word. But I'm pretending, I'm in the neighborhood of make-believe, and I'm pretending I'm reading the passage for the first time. So I'm looking for that as I read. So I'm not going to skim it right now because this is my first reading of the passage. But her importance goes well beyond her films. Wait a minute, I didn't read the rest of that. But armed with her book and with a list she provided researchers of the films that she could remember, it has been possible to put her name to many orphan prints. But her importance goes well beyond her films. The second way in which she is a compelling figure is her decisive participation in the elaboration of film production as an organized industrial process. When cinema first appeared as a for-profit enterprise, filmmaking followed artisanal model. Louis Lumière, who first clearly demonstrated the commercial possibilities of the new medium, trained his operators to photograph as cinematographers celebrated views, to develop them and make positive contact prints, and to project them to a paying audience. All the work of one person with a single machine. All right, so artisanal has to all be the work of one person with a single machine. Let me look at the answer choices. One person, single machine. A head of production and numerous film crew artists. Well, numerous isn't one. Goodbye. One person doing almost all of the film production. Oh, that sounds right. One person with one machine. One set designer and a company owner. No, it didn't say one set designer. It said one person doing all of the work. A publicist, a scriptwriter, and a star. Well, that's three people, not one person. So the answer is B. I found the answer as I was reading the passage. And now I would finish reading the passage because this is my first time reading through it. If you're the type of person who says, well, I just want to go find the information in the passage, think about this. There are questions that have line references, and then there are questions like this that have very clear keywords in them. So you can use those keywords to skim the passage and find the information that talks about that. But I'm just saying, if you read one question that's not a big picture question, isn't asking about the main idea or the author perspective in general, isn't a question with a line reference that's easy to find, is a question that you're going to have to look for that asks about a detail, you might as well look at that as you're reading the passage for the first time. So that's the reading section. These are just some quick tips a few days before the test. Be ready with your method. Stick to it. Like I said, don't make any major changes just a few days before the test. And here's another one. They always ask. ACT will always ask big picture questions, at least one of them. What is the author perspective? What is the main idea? What is the main purpose? Be right. You don't even have to read the questions to know there's going to be a big picture question like that. So automatically, write down what the main idea, main purpose of the passage is in a couple of words. Be ready to answer that question without even having to read it. Be ready to answer that question. Science section. Just a few tips for the science section. Is there a fundamental rule of ACT science? There sure is. The answer is on the page. There's an exception. 3 to 5 times you have to know something simple, like the boiling point of water, 100 degrees Celsius, like the freezing point of water, 0 degrees Celsius. Usually it's not going to ask in Fahrenheit. There was a question like this. It said, I have a beaker, and I have a thermometer in that beaker, and I find that the beaker is full of water, and I take the temperature, and it's at 72 degrees. What form does the material, the chemical in the beaker tend to be in? Is it a liquid? Is it a solid? Is it a gas? Or unknown? Well, you know that this is science knowledge you have to have. So the information is on the page. It tells you it's 72 degrees, and it tells you it's water. You have to know the boiling point of water is 100 degrees Celsius, the freezing point is 0, and you have to know between the boiling and freezing point, it's going to be a liquid. So the answer to this is A. If it said it was 172 degrees, it would tend to be a gas. If it was negative 12 degrees Celsius, it would tend to be a solid. The answer is on the page, and think simple. Sometimes if they ask you something that seems complicated, here was one. They said there's 2 orbs, orb A and orb B. I like to give examples. This is from an actual test. And they have all kinds of forces that these orbs have. Electromagnetic forces, electric forces, gravitational forces, who knows? They have all kinds of forces. In order for a force to act from orb A onto orb B, which direction must that force travel? Does it have to travel to the right. They wrote the words. I'm just going to write arrows. To the left, up, or down. Well, here's orb A and here's orb B. For a force to get from orb A to orb B, it's going to have to travel to the right. That's answer A. One student said, well, how do I know it doesn't go up the wire like this and then back down to B? Well, there is no answer choice, up, right, down. So think simple. It's got to travel to the right. I say for every passage on the ACT science section, skip the passage, go right to the questions. Some people say for conflicting viewpoint. Conflicting viewpoint is the type of passage that generally doesn't have tables, charts, graphs, and figures. If it does have any, it has very few of them. And it talks about multiple scientists or multiple students. It's got a lot of text. It looks a lot like the reading section. So some people say, well, read that passage first. But for all the other types of passages, and there's only one conflicting viewpoint on each test, but for all the other types of passages, you should read the conflicting. All the other types of passages, don't read the passage, go right to the questions. For conflicting viewpoints, read the passage. I say don't. I'll give you an example in a second of why I say you don't have to. But then I say, go right to the questions. Read and understand the questions. Then go looking for the answer. If it tells you where to look first where the question tells you. If it doesn't tell you where to look in tables, charts, graphs, and figures first, because 80% of the time, 85% of the time, that's where you'll find the answer. Sometimes you won't find the whole answer there. There's some other information you need, or you don't find the answer there at all. So then second, look to the text. And if you don't find it in the text, look to your own science knowledge. And if you're still not sure, eliminate the wrong answers and or pick the right answer. Maybe you can only eliminate 2. Well, then guess among the other 2. Maybe you can only eliminate 1. Guess among the other 3. Your chances go from 25% to 33.3% if you can eliminate even one answer choice. Here's an example of conflicting viewpoints passage on the science section. And it's got all this stuff there about these students and everything. And I'm just going to look at question 1. I'm skipping it. Some people say you should read it because it looks a lot like the reading section. Look at all those words. I say skip it. I'm going right to the question. Based on scientist 3's viewpoint, which of the following quantities is approximately equal for the stars in an open cluster? So see how this is different from the reading section. The reading section does have some questions that tell you where to look. It has big picture questions. But sometimes you have to go and figure out where in the passage whatever information is that you need to answer the question. Science in general tells you where to look, and if it doesn't, you know where to look first, second, third. It says based on, and especially in the conflicting viewpoints, it'll tell you which scientist viewpoint. Based on scientist 3 viewpoint, which of the following is approximately equal? Well, let me go down to scientist 3, and I'm looking for stars in an open cluster. Here's scientist 3. I'm looking for open cluster. And look at here, open cluster. It says, moreover, the sun cannot be part of an open cluster because the sun is 5 billion years old. Well, I don't know what that means. Is that too old or too young? So maybe an open cluster is older than 5 billion or younger than 5 billion, and the sun is 2 something. But the stars in open clusters all form at the same time. Well, I forgot a step here. I said read the question and answer choices. Read and understand the question and answer choices. Is it mass, diameter, age, or temperature? Well, it said the stars are all form at the same time. That means they'd all be the same age. So there's the answer. I didn't have to read all this stuff to get that answer. Let me look at this. Based on scientist 3's viewpoint, high velocity stars pass through or near our solar system. Well, let me look at high velocity stars. The galaxy's disk-shaped, sunlight in high velocity stars. Stars following orbits that are highly inclined. The bombardments that produce matter caused by high gravitational effects of the high velocity stars. They cause bombardments whenever they pass near the Oort cloud. This hypothesis is confirmed because scientists figure out high velocity stars pass through our solar system. Well, it doesn't I haven't seen a time yet. I'm looking for a time. The hypothesis is proven because rather than occurring every 26 million years, mass extinction occurs at irregular intervals. So it says the bombardments that produce mass extinction are caused by gravitational effects of high velocity stars, and these Mass extinctions happen at irregular intervals. Irregular intervals. F. So there you go. I didn't have to read the whole passage to find those answers. And you can find that over and over and over again. Anything else before we go? There's no reason to work the passages in order. If you, through your studies, have found that a certain passage type in science gives you trouble, for example, if it's the conflicting viewpoint, save it for last. All the passages are worth the same amount of points, so you might want to save the one that gives you the most trouble for the end. I would say if it's only a few days before the ACT and you haven't practiced doing that, probably not a good idea to skip around. But if you're going to do it for the long term, you take the test this Saturday, you find out you don't get your score, now you have to study some more. Now think about changing your process and saving a more difficult passage for later. It usually takes about 3 to 6 months of total time, not that you're working every minute of 3 to 6 months, but 3 to 6 months to prepare for the ACT. Come up with a plan, make a schedule, put it on a calendar, do some type of work every day, 15 minutes a day, an hour a day, whatever it is. And when you talk to me, I will tell you, rule of thumb, how much time it's going to take approximately to raise your score from where you are to where you need to be. So then you can plan accordingly and come up with a study plan that is workable for you. But have your get some good sleep the night before the test. Have your calculator charged. Bring extra batteries if it takes batteries. If it charges and works batteries, uses batteries, have it well charged and have extra batteries with you just in case. Bring an extra calculator with you if you can. You have a friend who's not taking the test that day, ask them to borrow their calculator just so you have it as a backup. Get plenty of sleep the night before. Bring layers of clothing so if you're cold you can take some things off. If you're warm you can put some things on. And bring a little snack, bring some water so you can take a sip of something in between sections when you have a break after the math section. Or you can eat something if you get hungry after the math section. It's a long test. 3 hours is a long time, but don't eat too much. Don't do anything unusual on the day of the test. If you eat a big breakfast and you normally don't, it might give you trouble during the tests. You're going to have to use the restroom or it upsets your stomach and you're uncomfortable, or you throw up or something. That's happened to people before in the tests, so don't do that. Do your best on the test, and if you find out that you're going to need to do more preparation, send an email to franktutor, franktutor, @outlook.com. I'm going to write it down, franktutor, @outlook.com. Because we can do tutoring sessions together. That could help you prepare for the ACT. Or even if you don't want to do tutoring sessions, ask me questions. Ask me for a study plan. Here's the score that I have. Here's the score that I'm trying to get. Give me your section scores and I'll come up with a study plan. Here's how much time I'm willing to work every day. I'll communicate with you and come up with a study plan. But in one-on-one sessions or even group sessions, if you need a little break on how much it costs, do some group sessions. Get 3-4 people and share the cost. And then you can work together and get all the tips and information, and I'll help you improve your score on this test. franktutor, @outlook.com. That's it for now. Do your best. I don't like to say good luck. I say good skill, because that's what it takes for this test is good skill.